So there are a few videos out there that simulate what having schizophrenia is like. It's usually just a video of people going about their daily lives while they are hearing voices that say all kinds of things, usually negative ones, which is, accurate. Auditory hallucinations are, I think, the most common symptom of schizophrenia. So it's definitely representative of the disorder at large. It's just not all that there is to it. And of course, like with all mental disorders, and really with most diseases that people can have, your mileage may vary. Now, of course, for the most part, people who have schizophrenia lead normal lives. Many people have some level of hallucinations at all times, but the really debilitating places where you can be is in the really bad episodes that happen, episodically. They're not always on. They can vary in length, they can vary in triggers, they can vary in intensity, they can vary in absurdity, they can vary in themes, all manner of different options. But of course, that is the thing that people want to see. It would be rather boring to just show someone do their life, getting up in the morning, having breakfast, going to work, coming back home, watching The Simpsons on television, and then maybe in the middle of Saturday night at 3 a.m. they wake up, look out on the street, and see Jesus Christ dancing the Macarena in a rain that isn't even falling. Most of that is boring, and you don't want to put it in the video, so really, the proportion of how much weird shit happens in the perception of schizophrenic people is, of course, due to the availability heuristic, often a bit exaggerated. But it is more accurate because most people, especially those with medication who have schizophrenia, are able to lead relatively normal lives. And I am very lucky to be able to count myself among those people. Like, really, my schizophrenia is rather mild, or at least I am high functioning with it. Really, the depression that I have, it has a much bigger debilitating impact on my life, and even that I have learned to live with. I'm not even medicated for schizophrenia. That is how okay I am. But I think I'm in a very good position to explain to people some of the more difficult to explain symptoms of schizophrenia, namely paranoid delusions and just psychosis, which I think because, this might be the case, but schizophrenia has recently been reclassified, I think, as more of a spectrum disorder, and there's no more paranoid schizophrenia, so maybe those are now the same thing. They are certainly related. I am not actually a psychologist, I just have this shit. So probably you can all imagine what hallucinations are. You've seen them on TV. They are, seeing things, feeling things, hearing things, smelling things that aren't actually there. There's a spectrum between hallucination and pseudo-hallucination, which just kind of measures how much you think that is actually true. You may well know that the man with the glowing red eyes coming your way with a stabby knife that's really just looking at you, staring you down, and is definitely fully intent on stabbing you is not, in fact, real. It's noon, you're in a Burger King, all of the other people around you don't seem to be reacting to him. Maybe you even have an inherent sense that this is a hallucination and not real. But sometimes you end up asking yourself if that is a risk you really want to be taking. It is, after all, a guy with glowing red eyes and a stabby knife. It's very difficult to pass that sometimes and make the correct judgment call, and with psychosis it can be even more difficult. Schizophrenic people are completely rational within the perception of their own reality, right? But the thing is, if you genuinely believe that if you step on the space between the tiles, then demons will come out of the ground and eat you, it's entirely rational to not do that at all costs and to be terrified of it happening accidentally. That is a very rational thought process. Where hallucinations are sensory inputs you believe are there, but which are really not, a psychosis is a belief which you believe is true when it is really not. And sometimes, as with pseudo-hallucinations, you know that the belief isn't true, but it's almost impossible not to believe it. This very often comes in the form of seeing patterns and signs and reaching conclusions based on completely disparate data that has no connection to the conclusion that you are trying to reach. But your brain is hardwired to try and make sense of the world, so it absorbs this information that isn't there and tries to work with it. Now that may sound weird, but I promise you this is something you are familiar with. You do, after all, most likely, dream. You know how when you dream you can be in situations and scenarios that are just wild and like reach conclusions that make absolutely no logical sense, but while you are in the dream state, they do make all the sense in the world. This is called dream logic. Of course, that fortune cookie is a member of the Israeli Special Forces, and I have to eat it in order to acquire the powers that I can use to go downstairs to the roof and save the sister that I don't actually have from a threat that isn't really specified. I do have a sister, by the way. The sister that I don't actually have is one of those inherent contradictions that only make sense in dream logic. Now, in terms of like a psychosis to a schizophrenic in a waking state, that is a rather wild one, a high-level one that they're really just extreme cases might have, but it is entirely possible, and it illustrates the principle behind it. And you've probably also been in a dream situation where you went, hang on, this doesn't make any sense. If I eat the fortune cookie, why would it give me powers? That is a degree of pseudopsychosis. You are realizing at that point that this particular thing shouldn't make as much sense as it does. This is why, ironically, a lot of high-functioning schizophrenic people actually have extremely well-developed critical thinking skills because they use them all the time. They're constantly trying to discern reality from psychosis, which, by the way, is extremely exhausting. One of the most common delusions of people with schizophrenia is paranoia. You probably know this because aside from the hearing voices bit, it's pretty much the most iconic aspect of schizophrenia in the media. A lot of people with schizophrenia are convinced that they are being watched. And this tends to be one of those delusions that isn't necessarily episodic. It is always there in some limited capacity, even when you know it isn't true. Be it gang stalking, the FBI, the CIA, the KGB, aliens, angels, demons, or just documentary crews. The brain always tries to figure out why you are feeling watched. There has to be a reason for it. It's also often accompanied by a belief that one is special somehow, maybe pivotal to the fate of the universe, maybe special powers. It really depends on the individual. Personally, and bear in mind that this is not actually a supported theory, I think that that might be rather more a bit of a power fantasy, which, you know, you engage in power fantasies because you feel like you lack agency, and so you reclaim some of that agency and control over your life by indulging in that power fantasy. That's the purpose of power fantasies. They're defense mechanisms. So to defend yourself against the incursion of entities and organizations of such immense power, your brain tries to make it seem as though you are on their level, or maybe even on a higher level, which is maybe something that it gets convinced of because, you know, as many times as the almighty archdemons try to storm your house, nothing actually ever happens because they're not real. You know when you've just watched the film The Truman Show and you're in that contemplative what-if state of thinking, wait, maybe this is real, maybe I am just the subject of someone else's like life documentary television show. That, but all the time, is paranoid delusions. Watching The Truman Show actually fucked me up so much that just for days I had hallucinations of seeing like camera crews and cameras hiding just as I came around the corner and shit. It was bad. I didn't even have any idea that I had the disorder back then, which made it even worse. It's especially unusual for me because I almost never experience hallucinations of any kind. My paranoid delusion is more supernatural in a sense. I have this enduring belief that people, especially people I know, have the ability to perceive what I am doing telepathically, whether from like a third-person view, sometimes out of my perspective, that is just something that they can do, and they all somehow have agreed to not tell me about it and spy on me. It's very difficult for me to feel as though I have privacy, which is a problem because I really appreciate my privacy. I also don't really hear voices as such. It's really more like thoughts and ideas that are transmitted to me telepathically by sources inside of my own subconscious. They feel like separate entities, but I know rationally that they're not. Ultimately, that is also the voices. It's just that my brain expresses or interprets them, probably both, in a different way to people who experience them as hallucinations. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I am happier with this arrangement than I would have been with the alternative. They are so-called intrusive thought patterns, and they're common to a lot of different psychological disorders. They're also a thing where people go, just think about something else, which is not how that works at all. You can't just think about something else. They're intrusive thoughts. They don't demand your attention, they just take it. And once again, this is something that most people experience some version of at some point in their lives. Have you ever lost a loved one, like gone through a tough breakup, or known that there would be a terrifying situation in the near future that you would have to face? You probably spent a lot of time thinking about that, and those thoughts just sort of entered the stage, and they were there, and there was nothing you could do about it. Now, there are, of course, techniques that schizophrenic people tend to learn, often in therapy, but sometimes also of their own accord, they develop them, with which you can push such thoughts away. However, doing that is mentally exhausting as hell. It takes a lot of energy to push away intrusive thoughts. Even when you have distractions readily at hand to take your mind off of that specific thing, it is still an immense effort of willpower, and sometimes a futile one, because they just keep on coming, and they keep on coming, and they keep on coming, and they do not stop. And much like you only have a limited amount of physical energy in any given day, you also have only a limited amount of mental energy in any given day. This is why so many people with psychological disorders have so much trouble functioning in everyday society, and why they're often so low energy. They always have this constant expenditure of willpower that other people just don't have to deal with in order to maintain just basic mental hygiene. The kind of shit that neurotypical people have to deal with only at the darkest points of their lives, that's just a constant reality for people with a lot of different psychological disorders. And to end this video without a proper transition, because I couldn't be fucked to come up with one, a word about danger. Yes, it is true that people with schizophrenia can, while they are deep in psychosis, be rather unpredictable from the perspective of an outsider. We just don't function on the same logic as everybody else in that particular time and place. Look, I understand why some people would get scared of this. I really do, because it is kind of scary. However, that doesn't mean that we are dangerous. As a matter of fact, people with schizophrenia are a lot more likely to become victims of violence than the average person in society, because they will sometimes not even defend themselves while under attack. They are uniquely vulnerable to predation. And also, it turns out that most people, and this includes most schizophrenic people, are just not dicks. They don't actually want to do violence, they're not into violence, and they still have some capacity to recognize violence. The risk of being attacked by a schizophrenic person that is in the middle of a psychotic episode are incredibly low. Frankly, chances are that person is a lot more scared of you in that situation and of all the shit that's going on around it that they now have to try and make sense of than you could ever be of them. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, chill out. It's fine. You know, fucking, and see you around, cunts.